When my son-in-law, Blake, looked me dead in the eye just few days after my husband's funeral and told me to mourn, pack my bags, and never come back to the house I'd helped them buy, he had no idea he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. What this arrogant man discovered over the next few weeks didn't just destroy his smugness, it completely shattered everything he thought he knew about the helpless widow he had just tried to throw out on the street. I'm Eleanor Barrett. I'm 65 years old, and what I discovered about my daughter and son-in-law's secret financial schemes would shock you. But what I did about it, that's the kind of revenge that legends are made of. But before I tell you about my masterful takedown, smash that like button if you believe in justice being served, subscribe for more incredible revenge stories, and comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Let me tell you who I am, because it's important for understanding how I was able to turn the tables so completely on the people who tried to destroy me. I'm not your typical 65-year-old widow. After spending 37 years as a head nurse at St. Mary's General Hospital, I developed an almost supernatural ability to stay calm under pressure, think 3 steps ahead, and execute plans with surgical precision. My colleagues used to joke that I could organize a disaster response with one hand tied behind my back while simultaneously comforting a grieving family. I was the kind of woman who kept detailed records of everything, who noticed when things didn't add up, and who never, ever forgot a slight. My late husband Leo and I built our dream home in the quiet suburb of Maplewood 32 years ago. Leo was a gentleman who worked as a municipal engineer, and when he passed away suddenly from a heart attack, it left me not just heartbroken, but completely alone except for our only child, Clara. Clara was our pride and joy, or at least she used to be. At 38, she worked as a part-time administrative assistant, but had always struggled with money management and decision-making. Leo and I had bailed her out countless times over the years, always with the understanding that family comes first. 3 years ago, Clara married Blake Dalton, a man I never quite warmed to. Blake owned a small auto body shop called Dalton's Collision Repair, which he ran with more bravado than business sense. He was the type of man who talked big about success while his business barely stayed afloat. I noticed how Blake's eyes lit up whenever he visited our spacious 4-bedroom home with its immaculate garden and prime location. But I was a woman who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially family. Over the years, Leo and I had loaned Clara and Blake money for everything, from car repairs to business equipment. We'd helped with down payments, covered emergency expenses, and even co-signed loans when the young couple's credit wasn't quite good enough. I kept meticulous records of every transaction, not because I didn't trust family, but because that's just who I am. A woman who color codes her spice rack and keeps 40 years of tax returns organized in labeled boxes wasn't about to be casual about financial arrangements. What I didn't know was that my generosity and attention to detail were about to become the very weapons I used to destroy the people who tried to destroy me. The first week after Leo's funeral had been a blur of casseroles from neighbors, sympathy cards, and the overwhelming silence of a house that had never felt empty before. I moved through those days like I was underwater, handling the necessary arrangements with my typical efficiency, while my heart shattered a little more each morning when I woke up to Leo's empty side of the bed. Clara had been attentive during the funeral preparations, helping with flower arrangements and guest lists. Blake had even delivered a surprisingly heartfelt eulogy about Leo's kindness and generosity. For a moment, I felt grateful that despite my reservations about Blake, he truly seemed to care about family. But looking back, I realized there had been signs, small things that my grief-clouded mind had dismissed at the time. Blake's eyes constantly roaming around the house during the wake, as if he was taking inventory. The way he'd ask pointed questions about the mortgage status and my retirement accounts. How Clara had seemed nervous and jumpy, unable to meet my eyes for more than a few seconds at a time. The conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered a room. The way Blake's phone seemed to buzz constantly with calls he'd take outside, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. 7 days after the funeral, I decided to cook dinner for Clara and Blake. Not because I felt like cooking, food had lost taste since Leo died, but because I craved the comfort of family, the normalcy of sharing a meal with the only people I had left in the world. I spent hours preparing Leo's favorite pot roast, the way I'd made it every Sunday for 40 years. I set the dining room table with our good china, the set we'd received as a wedding gift and only used for special occasions. I even picked fresh flowers from my garden to make a centerpiece, hoping that creating something beautiful might lift the crushing weight from my chest.
Clara and Blake arrived right on time. Clara gave me a quick, stiff hug that felt different somehow. Distant, almost guilty. Blake shook my hand formally, like I was an acquaintance rather than family. As we sat down to eat, I tried to make conversation about normal things. How was Blake's business doing? Had Clara heard from her cousin in Seattle? Would they like to go through some of Leo's things together this weekend? But the responses were short, distracted. Clara kept glancing at Blake nervously, as if waiting for some kind of signal. Blake himself seemed to be building up to something, the way he kept clearing his throat and shifting in his chair. Then, as I was serving dessert, Leo's favorite apple pie, Blake pushed back from the table and made himself comfortable in Leo's recliner. The sight of another man in my husband's chair so soon after the funeral hit me like a physical blow. But I said nothing, thinking maybe Blake just needed to relax after dinner. That's when Blake looked directly at me with cold, calculating eyes and said the words that would change everything. "Eleanor, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your situation here." I set down the pie server, confusion creeping up my spine. My situation. Blake leaned back further in Leo's chair, his voice ticking on a tone I'd never heard before. Authoritative, almost cruel. "Look, I know this is hard to hear so soon after Leo's passing, but facts are facts. You're alone now. You're getting older. This big house is way too much for one person to handle." Clara was staring at her plate, her hands trembling slightly. "Blake, I don't understand what you're getting at," I said slowly. "What I'm getting at," Blake continued, his voice getting harder, "is that it's time for you to face reality. This house, this property, it was never really yours to begin with. Leo might have put your name on some papers, but let's be honest about who really built the life you've been living." I felt the room start to spin. "Excuse me?" Blake's smile was cold and predatory. "Claire and I have been talking, and we think it would be best for everyone if you started looking into other living arrangements. Maybe a nice senior community, somewhere more appropriate for someone in your situation." "My situation?" My voice was barely a whisper. "A widow with no real income except Social Security and a pension that probably won't last long with inflation. Let's not pretend you can afford to maintain this place on your own." Clara finally looked up, her eyes red but her voice steady. "Mom, Blake's right. This house is too big for you, and we need to think about what's practical." I looked at my daughter, my only child, the little girl I'd rocked to sleep, nursed through fevers, cheered at school plays, and saw a stranger. "I don't understand what's happening here," I said, my nurse training kicking in as I tried to stay calm and assess the situation. Blake's mask completely dropped then. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and spoke with the cold efficiency of a businessman closing a deal. "Here's what's happening, Eleanor. Clara is Leo's heir. This house, the property, the assets, they're going to Clara eventually anyway. We're just suggesting that eventually should be now while you can still make the transition gracefully. Transition? My voice was getting stronger, anger beginning to burn through the shock. You need to start grieving, Eleanor. Really grieving. Accept that Leo is gone, accept that your life here is over, and start planning for what comes next, somewhere else. The room was silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock Leo had bought for our 20th anniversary. Then, Blake delivered the final blow. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to take some time to mourn your husband properly. Then you're going to pack your things and find somewhere else to live. Because this place was never really yours, Eleanor. And now that your husband is dead, it's time to stop pretending it was. Clara nodded, still not meeting my eyes. We'll give you time, Mom, but Blake's right. It's better for everyone this way. I sat in stunned silence, watching my daughter and son-in-law, these people I had loved, supported, and sacrificed for, calmly discuss my eviction from the home I'd built with my own hands and 40 years of marriage. The weight of every loan we'd given them crashed down on my consciousness. The $25,000 we'd lent for Blake's shop equipment, the $50,000 down payment help for Clara's first car and various emergencies over the years, the $75,000 we'd gifted for the couple's own house down payment, the $75,000 more in co-signed loans and guarantees.
$225,000 of love and support. And this was how they repaid it. As Blake and Clara gathered their coats to leave, chatting casually about logistics and timelines as if they'd just discussed the weather, I remained seated at my dining room table, surrounded by the remnants of the meal I'd prepared with such hope. Blake paused at the door and looked back at me with what might have been pity on another person's face, but looked like smug satisfaction on his. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Eleanor. You're a smart woman. You'll figure out what's best for everyone. After they left, I sat in the silence of my home, looking at Rio's empty chair, and felt something shift inside my chest. The grief was still there, crushing and constant, but alongside it, something else was growing. Something cold, calculating, and absolutely furious. I had spent 37 years as a head nurse. I'd managed crisis situations, dealt with impossible people, and solved problems that seemed insurmountable. I'd raised a daughter, built a marriage, and created a life through careful planning and relentless attention to detail. And if Blake Dalton thought that a grieving widow would simply roll over and hand him everything I'd worked for, he was about to learn just how badly he'd miscalculated. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold hours ago, staring at the folder I'd retrieved from Leo's home office. Inside were copies of every financial transaction we'd ever made involving Clara and Blake. Loans, gifts, co-signed agreements, bank statements, everything. As a head nurse, I'd learned early that information was power. In medical emergencies, the difference between life and death often came down to having accurate, complete information quickly accessible. I'd applied that same principle to every aspect of my life, including our family finances. Now, as I spread the documents across my kitchen table, I began to see patterns that chilled my blood. The first red flag was a co-signed loan agreement from 18 months ago. I remember Leo mentioning it. Blake needed $88,000 for new equipment for his auto body shop. The monthly payments were supposed to be $1,200, automatically debited from Blake's business account. But according to the bank statements I had access to as a co-signer, there hadn't been a payment in 4 months. My hands were steady as I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. What I found there made my stomach drop.
There were transactions I didn't recognize. A $55,000 home equity line of credit that had been opened 6 months ago using my house as collateral. My signature was on the documents, but I had no memory of signing them. Looking closer, I realized the signature wasn't quite right. The E in Eleanor was formed differently than I usually wrote it. Someone had forged my signature. But that wasn't the worst of it. I spent the next 4 hours going through every bank statement, every credit report I could access, every piece of financial documentation in Leo's and my files. What emerged was a picture of systematic financial betrayal that took my breath away. Clara and Blake weren't just behind on their own mortgage, they were 60 days past due and facing foreclosure. They'd maxed out the forged home equity line on my house and used the money not for emergencies, but for Blake's failing business and what appeared to be significant gambling debts based on regular large withdrawals at a casino 2 towns over. The $88,000 equipment loan that I had unknowingly guaranteed was in default. The auto body shop was hemorrhaging money, with multiple liens filed against it by suppliers and creditors. Most shocking of all, Blake had filed for personal bankruptcy 2 weeks earlier, after Leo's funeral, without telling me, despite the fact that I was legally liable for his debts as a cosigner and guarantor. I sat back in my chair as the full scope of their betrayal became clear. This wasn't a sudden decision made in grief or desperation. This was a calculated, long-term plan to steal everything Leo and I had built. They'd been planning this for months, maybe years. The forged signatures, the secret loans, the bankruptcy filing, it was all designed to leave me holding the bag for their debts while they took ownership of my house. If their plan succeeded, I wouldn't just lose my home. I'd be financially ruined, potentially owing more than $200,000 in loans and guarantees I'd either forgotten about or never actually agreed to. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They'd sat at my dinner table, eaten my food, let me serve them while they planned to destroy my life. But as I closed my laptop and gathered the documents back into neat piles, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Leo's death. Clarity. Blake and Clara had made one critical error in their planning. They'd assumed that I was just a grieving widow, overwhelmed and vulnerable, easy to manipulate and push around. They'd forgotten that I was a woman who had spent nearly 4 decades managing life and death situations, who thrived under pressure, and who had a network of professional contacts that spanned half the state. They'd forgotten that the woman they were trying to victimize was the same woman who had once reorganized an entire hospital's emergency response system in the middle of a natural disaster. Most importantly, they'd forgotten that I had never, in my entire life, let anyone take advantage of me without consequences. As the sun rose over Maplewood, I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and started making a list. Not a list of what I'd lost, but a list of what I was going to do about it. Blake Dalton wanted to play games with someone he thought was helpless. He was about to discover just how wrong he was. I didn't rush into action. That wasn't my style. And besides, hasty moves would only give Blake and Clara time to adjust their strategy. Instead, I spent the next 3 days doing what I did best, gathering information, building networks, and creating a plan so thorough that every possible outcome was accounted for. My first call was to Janet Moore, my former colleague at Rosewood Bank, where I had volunteered as a community finance counselor for 5 years after retiring from nursing. Janet was now a senior loan officer, and more importantly, she was someone I trusted completely. "Eleanor, honey, I was so sorry to hear about Leo. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing, Janet, but I need your help with something, and it's not what you might expect." I explained the situation carefully, clinically, the way I used to present patient cases to doctors. Janet's responses went from sympathetic to shocked to absolutely furious. They forged your signature, Eleanor? That's fraud. That's criminal. I know, but I need to understand the full scope of what I'm dealing with before I decide how to handle it. Janet was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? I need everything. Every loan, every credit check, every financial transaction Clara and Blake have made in the last 2 years. I need to know which banks they're working with, who their creditors are, and exactly how precarious their financial situation really is. Eleanor, I can't just... Janet, I'm not asking you to do anything illegal. I'm a co-signer on multiple loans. I have a legal right to information about accounts I'm liable for. And as for the rest, well, you know how small the banking community is around here. People talk. Janet sighed. Give me 24 hours. My next call was to Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the current head of emergency services at St. Mary's, and one of my former protégés. Patricia had always valued my ability to see the big picture and coordinate complex responses. Dr. Hendricks, it's Eleanor Barrett. I hope I'm not interrupting. Eleanor, never. What can I do for you? I need some advice about dealing with a crisis situation. Not medical, personal. But I need to approach it the way we used to approach disaster planning. I outlined my situation without getting into specific details. Patricia listened with the same focused attention she brought to medical emergencies. So you're looking at a multi-vector problem with several different stakeholders, significant financial exposure, and opponents who think they have information advantage, Patricia summarized. Exactly. Eleanor, you taught me that the key to managing any crisis is controlling the flow of information and the timing of interventions. You need to know more than your opponents know, and you need to act faster than they can react. That's what I was thinking. What resources do you have available? I smiled for the first time in days. More than they realize.
My third call was to Michael Chen, a real estate attorney who had handled the purchase of my house 30 years ago and had remained a family friend. Michael's practice now focused on real estate fraud and elder abuse cases. Eleanor, I heard about Leo. I'm so sorry. Thank you, Michael. I need to ask you about something, and I need you to be completely honest with me about my options. After I explained the situation, Michael was quiet for a long time. Eleanor, what they've done, the forged signatures, the unauthorized use of your property as collateral, the failure to disclose bankruptcy filing, this is serious criminal behavior. You could have them arrested. I know, but I'm not sure that's the outcome I want. What outcome do you want? I thought about that question for a long time. I want them to understand that actions have consequences. I want my home and my financial security protected, and I want to make sure they never, ever try something like this again with anyone else. That's a tall order. I know, but I think I have a plan. By the time Janet called back the next day, I had the framework of my strategy mapped out. What Janet told me filled in the missing pieces perfectly. Eleanor, their situation is even worse than you thought. Blake's business is hemorrhaging money. He's behind on rent, utilities, supplier payments, everything. The gambling debts are substantial. And here's the thing that's going to interest you. They've been applying for emergency loans at every bank in the county. Emergency loans? Short-term, high-interest loans for people in desperate financial situations. The kind of thing people apply for when they're about to lose everything. My mind began racing. Which banks? All of them. First National, Community Trust, even some of the smaller credit unions. They're getting turned down because their debt-to-income ratio is astronomical, and Blake's bankruptcy filing triggered automatic rejections. But they're still trying? Desperately. Word is getting around the banking community that they're shopping for someone willing to take a risk on them. I smiled. Janet, how well connected are you with loan officers at other banks? Pretty well. Why? Because I'm going to need some help making sure their applications keep getting rejected.
Eleanor Barrett, what are you planning? I'm planning to teach two people a very important lesson about the consequences of greed. My plan was elegantly simple. Instead of confronting Blake and Clara directly or immediately involving law enforcement, I was going to let their own desperation destroy them. I would use my network of contacts in the banking community to ensure that every financial lifeline they reached for would be just out of grasp. I would leverage my connections in city government to make sure Blake's business faced every regulatory challenge it had been avoiding. I would systematically close off every avenue of escape until they had no choice but to come to me, hat in hand, begging for the mercy they had refused to show me. And when they did, I would be ready with terms of my own. If you're enjoying my brilliant strategy, hit that subscribe button because you won't believe what I do next. I spent the rest of the week making calls, sending emails, and having coffee meetings with people I'd worked with over the decades. To the outside world, it looked like a grieving widow trying to keep busy and maintain social connections. In reality, I was building the most sophisticated financial pressure campaign that Maplewood had ever seen. My first target was Blake's auto body shop. I had noticed during my document review that Blake's business license was up for renewal, and I suspected he'd been cutting corners on safety inspections and insurance requirements. A casual conversation with Tom Bradley, who worked in the city's business licensing department and whose daughter I had helped get into nursing school, confirmed my suspicions. Blake Dalton's shop? Yeah, we've had some concerns about compliance issues there. Insurance has lapsed a couple of times. Safety inspections are always submitted right at the deadline, if at all.
That sounds concerning, Tom. I'd hate for someone to get hurt because proper procedures weren't being followed. You know, Eleanor, I think it might be time for a comprehensive review of his compliance status. Thanks for bringing this to my attention. Within 2 days, Blake's shop was shut down pending a full safety and insurance review. Without the ability to operate, his already known existent cash flow disappeared completely. My banking network proved even more effective. Janet coordinated with loan officers at 5 different institutions to ensure that Blake and Clara's applications were not just rejected, but rejected in ways that damaged their credit score further. Each rejection triggered automatic reviews of their existing accounts, which led to discoveries of missed payments and covenant violations. Within a week, Blake and Clara were dealing with collection calls, penalty fees, and the looming threat of having their existing accounts frozen. My masterstroke came when I reached out to Rebecca Walsh, a former colleague who now worked in the county clerk's office, handling foreclosure proceedings. Rebecca, I need a favor, and I need you to be discreet about it. Of course, Eleanor. What can I do? I need to know the exact timeline for foreclosure proceedings on my daughter's house, and I need to know if there's a way to expedite the process if the homeowners are in default on other obligations. Eleanor, that's your daughter's house. It's complicated, Rebecca, but I need to know my options. What I learned was that Clara and Blake's house was already in pre-foreclosure, with a final notice period that would expire in 12 days. If they couldn't come up with $47,000 in back payments and fees, they would lose their house. But here was the key detail. As co-signers and guarantors on various loans, I had legal standing to petition for accelerated foreclosure proceedings if I could demonstrate that the borrowers were engaging in fraudulent behavior or hiding assets. The forged signature on the home equity line of credit qualified as fraudulent behavior. I had all the pieces in place. Blake's business was shut down, their credit was destroyed, they were facing foreclosure in less than 2 weeks, and if they somehow managed to find money to save their house, I could trigger legal proceedings that would take it away anyway. But I wasn't done. My final move was the most psychologically devastating of all. I began volunteering again at Rosewood Bank, specifically in the Community Financial Counseling Program that helped people facing foreclosure and bankruptcy. It was legitimate volunteer work that I'd done before, but it put me in position to hear about every financial crisis in town, including Blake and Clara's increasingly desperate attempts to find help.
When Blake called the bank's financial crisis hotline looking for emergency counseling, guess who was assigned to take his call? Rosewood Bank Financial Counseling, this is Eleanor. How can I help you today? The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that I thought the call had dropped. Blake, are you there? Eleanor, this is the financial crisis hotline, Blake. You called asking for help with an emergency situation. I'm here to help. My voice was professionally calm, with just a hint of the warmth I'd once shown him as family. It was more devastating than any anger could have been. Clara and I, Blake, I can see from your file that you're facing some significant challenges. Foreclosure, business closure, bankruptcy. These are serious issues that require immediate attention. Eleanor, please, I can't. Blake, I'm going to need you to focus. You called for help, and I'm here to provide professional financial counseling. Now, according to your credit report, you are currently in default on multiple loans totaling approximately $200,000. Is that accurate? The conversation lasted 23 minutes. By the end of it, Blake understood that I knew everything. Every debt, every missed payment, every lie they'd told, every scheme they had attempted, and that the woman they'd tried to victimize was not only still in control of her own situation, but now had complete control over theirs as well. When Blake hung up, I sat back in my chair at the bank's volunteer station and smiled.
It was time for phase 2. I didn't have to wait long for Blake and Clara to make contact. The financial counseling call had been on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, my phone was ringing constantly. The first call came from Clara at 7:30 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, it's me. We need to talk. Please call me back. The second call came an hour later, this time from Blake. Eleanor, look, I think there's been some misunderstanding. We need to sit down and work this out. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the whole thing. The calls continued throughout the weekend. By Sunday evening, I had 17 voicemails, 12 text messages, and Clara had actually shown up at my door twice. I watched from my living room window as my daughter rang the doorbell, knocked, and eventually sat on my front steps crying for 20 minutes before driving away. I felt a pang of sympathy for Clara, but not enough to break my resolve. Clara had made her choice when she nodded along with Blake's cruel ultimatum. Now she could live with the consequences. On Monday morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. This time I answered. Hello, Clara. Mom, thank God. We've been trying to reach you. We're in trouble. Serious trouble. What kind of trouble? Blake's shop got shut down. Some kind of inspection issue. And the bank, multiple banks, they're all rejecting our loan applications. Mom, we're going to lose the house. My voice was carefully neutral. That sounds very difficult. Mom, we need help. We need money. Just temporarily until Blake can get the shop reopened and we can get back on our feet. How much money? $25,000, maybe $30,000? Just to catch up on the mortgage and buy us some time. I was quiet for a long moment. Clara, when you and Blake came to dinner last week, you told me I needed to pack my things and leave my house. You said this place was never really mine. Why would you expect financial help from someone whose home you're trying to steal? Mom, Blake was upset. He didn't mean what, Clara? He didn't mean that I should grieve my husband and find somewhere else to live, because that seemed very clear to me. Clara was crying now. Mom, please, we made a mistake. Blake was scared about money and we thought... You thought what? That I was weak? That I was helpless? That I would just roll over and hand you everything I've worked for? Mom, please. I hung up. The next call came from Blake directly, 2 hours later. Eleanor,
We need to talk, face to face. Do we? Look, I know I said some things that were out of line. I was stressed about money and I wasn't thinking clearly. But this, whatever you're doing, it's destroying us. I'm not doing anything, Blake. I'm simply no longer enabling your irresponsible financial behavior. Eleanor, my business is shut down because of some bullshit inspection that came out of nowhere. Every bank in the county is rejecting our applications. Our credit score has dropped 50 points in 2 weeks. This isn't coincidence. My voice remained calm. Blake, when you own a business, you're responsible for maintaining proper insurance and safety compliance. When you apply for loans, banks evaluate your creditworthiness based on your payment history and debt-to-income ratio. These are normal business processes. Cut the crap, Eleanor. I know you're behind this. Behind what exactly? Behind the fact that you've been running an uninsured auto shop? Behind the fact that you haven't made a loan payment in 4 months? Behind the fact that you forged my signature on a home equity line of credit?
The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. That's right, Blake. I know about the forged signature. I know about the bankruptcy filing you didn't tell me about. I know about the gambling debts and the maxed out credit lines and the fact that you've been planning to steal my house for months. Eleanor. So here's what's going to happen, Blake. You and Clara are going to figure out your financial problems on your own, the same way you plan to leave me to figure out mine. And if I find out you've used my name or my credit for anything else without my knowledge, I'll have you arrested for fraud. I hung up and turned off my phone. But I wasn't done. That afternoon, I drove to the courthouse and filed a formal complaint about the forged signature on my home equity line of credit. I provided copies of signature analysis, bank records, and a sworn statement detailing the unauthorized use of my property as collateral. The complaint triggered an automatic investigation by the district attorney's office and froze the home equity account pending resolution. It also triggered a review of all of my co-signed loans and guarantees, which led to the discovery that Blake had been making unauthorized charges against several of our shared accounts. By Wednesday, Blake and Clara were facing not just foreclosure and business failure, but potential criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. That's when my phone rang with the call I'd been waiting for. "Mom?" Clara's voice was barely a whisper. "Blake's been arrested." I had been expecting this, but I still felt a jolt of shock. Arrested? Fraud charges? They came to the house this morning. Mom, I don't know what to do. The lawyer says bail is set at $50,000. We don't have $50,000. We don't have $5,000. I was quiet. "Mom, please. I know we messed up. I know we hurt you, but Blake is my husband. I can't just leave him in jail." "Clara, you made your choice when you decided to steal from me. You chose Blake over your own mother. Why would you expect me to choose differently?" "Because you're better than we are." Clara's voice broke completely. "Because you're kind and generous, and you've always been there for family, even when family doesn't deserve it. Because you're nothing like us, and that's why we need you." I felt tears running down my cheeks, but my voice remained steady. "It's too late for that, Clara." "No, it's not. Mom, please. It can't be too late." I hung up, but this time I didn't turn off my phone. 3 hours later, it rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Barrett, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the County Sheriff's Office. I understand you filed a complaint regarding identity theft and fraud?" "Yes." "Ma'am, I wanted to let you know that we've arrested Blake Dalton in connection with your complaint. We're also investigating additional charges related to loan fraud and forgery. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to come in and provide additional testimony." I considered this carefully. "Detective, what would happen if I decided not to pursue criminal charges?" Well, that would be up to you, ma'am. The district attorney might still pursue the case based on the evidence we have, but your cooperation would make it much stronger. And if I did decide to pursue charges, Mr. Dalton would likely be looking at significant jail time, especially if we can prove a pattern of fraud. His wife might also face charges as an accomplice, depending on what we find. I thanked the detective and said I'd call back within 24 hours with my decision. That evening, as I sat in my quiet house, looking at Leo's photograph on the mantel, I realized I'd reached the moment I'd been building toward. Blake and Clara were completely at my mercy. Their house was in foreclosure. Blake was in jail. Clara was alone and desperate. They had no money, no credit, no business, and no options. I had won completely.
I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, writing and rewriting a list of terms and conditions. By morning, I had a plan that was both merciful and ruthless, exactly the kind of calculated compassion that had made me such an effective head nurse. At 9 a.m., I called Detective Martinez. "Detective, this is Eleanor Barrett. I've decided not to pursue criminal charges at this time." "Are you sure about that, ma'am? This was a serious crime." "I'm sure, but I want the charges to remain filed pending resolution of some family matters. Can you arrange for Mr. Dalton to be released on his own recognizance if I agree not to press charges at this time?" "That's unusual, but yes, I can speak to the prosecutor about that arrangement." "Good. Please let Mr. Dalton know that I'll be in touch about resolving this matter privately." 2 hours later, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Clara standing on my front porch, alone. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes red from crying, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Mom, Blake's being released. They said you're not pressing charges?" "That's correct." "I don't understand. Why would you—" I stepped aside and gestured for her to come in. "Sit down, Clara. We need to have a conversation." Clara sat on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid to get comfortable. I took my usual chair across from her, the one where I used to read her bedtime stories when she was little. "Clara, do you know why I'm not pressing charges against Blake?" She shook her head, tears starting again. "Because sending Blake to prison wouldn't teach either of you the lesson you need to learn. It would just make you victims instead of helping you understand that you chose to become criminals." "Mom, we're not criminals. We made mistakes." I reached for a folder I'd prepared and set it on the coffee table between us. "Open it." Clara opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were copies of every forged document, every missed payment, every lie they'd told over the past 2 years, bank statements showing the gambling withdrawals, credit reports showing their mounting debts, legal documents showing Blake's secret bankruptcy filing. As Clara looked through the papers, her face went white. "You see, Clara, this wasn't a mistake. This was a systematic plan to steal everything your father and I worked for. You forged my signature. You used my house as collateral without my knowledge. You planned to throw me out of my own home while you stuck me with your debts." "Mom, I never wanted—" "What didn't you want? You didn't want to hurt me? Then why did you sit at my dinner table and nod when Blake told me to pack my bags and leave? You didn't want to steal from me? Then why did you forge my signature?" Clara was sobbing now, but I continued with clinical precision. "Here's what's going to happen now. Blake will be home soon, and you're both going to have a choice to make. You can continue down this path of lies and theft, in which case I will press full criminal charges and you'll both go to prison. Or you can accept the terms I'm about to offer you." "What terms?" I pulled out a second folder, this one containing a typed contract I'd spent hours perfecting. "First, you will write a full public apology acknowledging what you've done. This apology will be posted on your social media accounts and in the neighborhood bulletin board, where everyone can see it.
You will admit to forging my signature, admit to trying to steal my house, and admit that you treated me cruelly after my husband's death." Clara stared at the contract in horror. "Second, you will agree to permanent behavioral terms regarding how you treat me. I am the family matriarch, and you will treat me with the respect that position deserves. No more demands, no more ultimatums, no more attempts to control my life or my property." I turned to the next page. "Third, you will provide me with complete financial transparency going forward. Every bank account, every credit card, every loan, every debt. I will have access to all of it, and you will make no major financial decisions without my approval."
Mom, you can't. Fourth, you will both enter marriage counseling immediately. Your marriage is clearly built on a foundation of greed and mutual deception, and if you want to save it, you need professional help. I turn to the final page. Fifth, Blake will find employment that I consider acceptable. No more gambling. No more get-rich-quick schemes. No more failed businesses built on borrowed money. He will get a job with a steady paycheck and health insurance, and he will keep that job. Clara was staring at the contract like it was a snake that might bite her. And if we agree to all of this? I reached into my purse and pulled out a cashier's check, setting it on the table next to the contract. Then I will give you this, $35,000. Just enough to stop the foreclosure on your house and give you a chance to start over. Clara looked at the check, then back at me. Mom, this is everything we need. I know. But the apology, everyone will know what we did. Everyone should know what you did, Clara. Actions have consequences. And one of the consequences of trying to steal from your own mother is that people find out what kind of person you really are. Clara was quiet for a long time, staring at the check. What if we don't agree? What if we just walk away? Then Blake goes to prison for fraud. You lose your house for foreclosure in 8 days, and I make sure that everyone in town knows exactly why your marriage failed and your lives fell apart. I leaned forward in my chair. Clara, I'm offering you a chance to rebuild your life with dignity intact. You can choose to be people who made terrible mistakes but took responsibility for them, or you can choose to be people who destroyed their family through greed and ended up losing everything anyway. Clara was crying again, but quietly now. I need to talk to Blake. Of course. But Clara? I waited until she looked at me. This offer expires at 6 p.m. today. After that, I press full criminal charges, and you're on your own. What did you think of my strategy so far? Was it justified? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to see more stories of people getting the justice they deserve, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. 2 hours later, my doorbell rang again. This time it was both of them. Blake looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past week. His usual swagger was completely gone, replaced by the hunched posture of a man who'd finally realized he was in over his head. I invited them both in and gestured to the contract still sitting on my coffee table. Have you made your decision? Blake looked at Clara, then at me. Eleanor, I want to apologize. What I said to you after Leo's funeral was cruel and wrong. I was scared about money, and I took it out on you instead of dealing with my own problems. Go on. You know I have every right to press charges. I know I committed fraud. I know I don't deserve your help. His voice broke. But Clara doesn't deserve to lose everything because of my mistakes. I looked at my daughter. Clara, is that how you see this? That Blake made mistakes and you were just an innocent victim? Clara shook her head slowly. No, Mom. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I knew forging your signature was illegal. I knew trying to force you out of your house was cruel. I went along with it because I was scared we were going to lose everything, but that doesn't make it right. I looked at you with tears streaming down my face. I chose Blake over you, Mom. I chose money over family, and I'm ashamed of who I became. I felt something shift in my chest. For the first time since that horrible dinner, I saw my daughter instead of a stranger. Are you prepared to accept the terms I've outlined? Blake and Clara looked at each other.
than at me.
Yes, Clara said quietly. All of them. Blake. Blake swallowed hard. Yes, I agree to all the terms. I reached for a pen and slid it across the table. Then signed the contract. As they signed their names to the document that would govern the rest of our relationship, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Satisfaction at seeing justice done, sadness at what our family had become, but also, surprisingly, hope that maybe we could build something better from the wreckage. The apology needs to be posted online by tomorrow evening, I said as I handed Clara the check. And Blake, I want you to start looking for jobs immediately. Not businesses, not schemes. Jobs, with paychecks and W-2 forms. Blake nodded. I understand. And Clara, I want you to call Dr. Patricia Hendricks at St. Mary's. She can recommend a good marriage counselor. Yes, Mom. As they gathered their things to leave, Blake stopped at the door and turned back to me. Eleanor, can I ask you something? What? How long have you known? About the gambling, the forged signatures, all of it. I smiled. Blake, I've known for a very long time that you weren't the man you pretended to be. I just chose to give you the benefit of the doubt because you were family. That was my mistake. When did you stop giving me the benefit of the doubt? The moment you told me to pack my bags and get out of my own house. That's when I realized that kindness and family loyalty meant nothing to you. And that's when I decided to show you what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Blake's face went pale as the full scope of what I'd done hit him. You orchestrated all of this. The business shutdown, the loan rejections, everything. I simply made sure that the consequences of your actions caught up with you a little faster than they would have naturally. You were already headed for bankruptcy and foreclosure, Blake. I just removed the safety nets that were delaying the inevitable. How? I spent 37 years building relationships with people in this community. Doctors, lawyers, bankers, city officials. When you need help, those relationships matter. When you've burned your bridges, you find out how alone you really are. I looked directly into his eyes. You tried to steal from someone you thought was helpless and isolated. Instead, you found out that the woman you were trying to victimize had more power and more friends than you ever realized. Blake and Clara left my house that evening as different people than they'd been when they arrived. The swagger was gone, replaced by humility. The entitlement was gone, replaced by gratitude. The arrogance was gone, replaced by respect. Over the next few weeks, I watched as they followed through on their commitments. The public apology was painful to read, but thorough and genuine. Blake found a job as a mechanic at a reputable shop across town, working for someone else instead of trying to run his own business. Clara started marriage counseling and began treating me with a level of respect I hadn't seen from her in years. The $35,000 I'd given them stopped the foreclosure with just 2 days to spare. They kept their house, but now it came with the understanding that their financial decisions were subject to my approval. Some people might think I was too harsh, that I should have just forgiven them and moved on. But those people don't understand what Blake and Clara had really tried to do to me. They hadn't just tried to steal my house. They'd tried to steal my dignity, my security, my sense of family, and my faith in the people I loved most. They'd planned to leave me homeless and destitute while they profited from my generosity. That kind of betrayal doesn't deserve simple forgiveness. It deserves consequences that are educational.
3 months later, I was sitting in my garden, enjoying the afternoon sunshine and reading a book when Clara stopped by for our weekly check-in. "Hi, Mom. How are you feeling today?" "I'm well, dear. How are things with you and Blake?"
Better. The counseling is helping. Blake really likes his new job, and we're starting to pay down our debts. Clara sat down in the chair next to mine, something she would never have done during the months when she was planning to steal my house. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think you'll ever really forgive us?" I considered her question carefully. "Clara, forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once. It's something that's earned over time through changed behavior and genuine remorse. Are we earning it?" I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. She was thinner than she'd been during the crisis, but healthier somehow. The stress lines around her eyes were fading. She smiled more easily now. "You're making progress," I said. "Both of you." Clara nodded, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the garden that Leo and I had planted together so many years ago. "Mom?" "Yes." "I'm proud of you." "Proud of me?" "For not letting us destroy you, for fighting back, for being stronger than we gave you credit for." I reached over and squeezed my daughter's hand. "Clara, I hope you never have to be as strong as I was. But if you do, I hope you remember that kindness isn't weakness, and family doesn't give you the right to hurt people without consequences." "I'll remember." As Clara left that afternoon, I looked at Leo's photograph on the mantel and smiled. My home was secure, my dignity was intact, my family was learning to treat me with respect. And any future help I gave them would be on my terms, not theirs. Blake Dalton had thought he could take advantage of a grieving widow. Instead, he'd learned that underestimating Eleanor Barrett was the biggest mistake of his life. Some lessons are worth teaching even when they're painful for everyone involved, especially when they're painful for everyone involved. Looking back on everything that happened, people often ask me if I have any regrets. Do I wish I'd handled things differently? Do I think I was too harsh? My answer is always the same. I regret that it was necessary, but I don't regret what I did. Blake and Clara taught me an important lesson that day when they told me to pack my bags and leave my own home. They taught me that sometimes the people you love most are the ones most willing to take advantage of your kindness. But I taught them an even more important lesson in return. Never mistake kindness for weakness, and never underestimate the power of a woman who spent her life solving problems under pressure. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old widow. Instead, they found out they were dealing with someone who had spent decades managing life and death situations, building professional networks, and refusing to let anyone take advantage of her. The beautiful thing about consequences is that they're educational. Blake and Clara learned that greed has a price, that family loyalty works both ways, and that the woman they tried to victimize was far more resourceful than they'd ever imagined. Today, our family is stronger than it's been in years. Not because we pretend the betrayal never happened, but because we dealt with it honestly and made sure it could never happen again. Blake has kept his job and stayed away from gambling. Clara has learned to manage money responsibly and treat me with genuine respect. Their marriage survived because they were forced to confront the ugly truths about what they'd become. And me? I learned that even at 65, even as a widow, even when I'm grieving, I'm still Eleanor Barrett. I'm still the woman who can organize a disaster response, outmaneuver people who underestimate me, and protect what's mine with surgical precision.